If you're like a lot of people, you might think of the time between the Old and New Testaments as just, well, 400 years of silence. Sort of like God hit pause after Malachi and didn't start again until the angel spoke to Mary. Today, though, we're going to really dig into that idea and challenge it. We're diving deep into the Hasmonean period. That's roughly 163 to 37 BC. And honestly, it's this incredibly crucial, really dramatic, and surprisingly unknown chapter of history that acts as a powerful bridge between those two eras. So our mission here in this deep dive is to unpack this amazing story for you. It's both inspiring and, frankly, pretty sobering. It's got triumph, tragedy, incredible faithfulness, but also corruption, independence, and then subjugation. By the end, I think you'll really see how actively God was working during this time, preparing the world for the Incarnation, shaping the specific Jewish world Jesus was born into, and setting the stage for some major New Testament themes.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we're drawing on some really rich sources. We've got the Books of 1 and 2 Maccabees. Some of you might know them from the Apocrypha. They're these collections, sometimes included in older Bibles, and they offer vital historical perspectives. We're also looking at the very detailed writings of the Jewish historian Josephus. Plus, we're bringing in modern archaeological finds and, of course, current scholarly research.
And believe us, getting a handle on this period really sheds light on so many things in the New Testament that might otherwise seem, well, kind of obscure. Okay, so with that context set, let's jump into the really dramatic events that kind of kick this whole transformation off.
Yeah.
Right, so let's set the scene. Picture Jerusalem, maybe around 167 BC. It's a time of profound darkness. Imagine the temple, the one rebuilt after the exile now, completely desecrated. You've got foreign idols standing where the altar of God should be. Jewish worship, totally banned. Get this, mothers were being executed just for circumcising their sons according to the law. Torah scrolls were being burned publicly. The ruler behind this, the Seleucid king Antiochus Epiphanes, and his name ironically means God manifest, he had basically declared war on the God of Israel itself.
Yeah, it was intense. And this level of persecution, it really felt like a chilling fulfillment of what Daniel had prophesied about the abomination of desolation. But, amidst all that darkness, what's truly remarkable is how God raised up deliverers.
And what a deliverance. It starts small, in a village called Modin. There's this elderly priest, Mattathias. He sees another Jew about to offer a sacrifice to a pagan god under the eye of a Greek official. And in this surge of righteous anger, he strikes down both the apostate Jew and the official. Then he flees to the hills with his 5 sons. And that act, that spark, ignites what seemed like a totally impossible guerrilla war against this massive Seleucid Empire.
Right. And his son, Judah, he quickly gets this nickname Maccabeus.
The hammer.
The hammer, exactly, because he just keeps hitting them. He leads this small, faithful band and just one stunning victory after another, so much so that by 164 BC, they actually recapture Jerusalem. They cleanse the temple. And this leads to that amazing story. They go to relight the temple menorah, but there's only enough consecrated oil for one single day.
But it burns for 8 days.
Miraculously, yes.
Yeah.
8 days. Just enough time for them to prepare new, proper oil. And that event, that miracle, is the origin of the festival of Hanukkah, which, fascinatingly, Jesus himself observed centuries later. You see that mentioned in the Gospel of John.
Wow. And a really key insight here, I think, is that this Maccabean revolt wasn't just a military thing. It was spiritual warfare, really. These weren't trained soldiers. They were faithful Jews, willing to die rather than abandon their covenant with God.
Yeah.
Their success felt like this powerful proof that God was still defending his people, just like he did way back in the days of Joshua or David.
So these rebels, they actually become rulers. That's a huge shift. Under Simon, who is the last surviving son of Mattathias, they achieve something truly remarkable. Complete political independence. I mean, for the first time since the Babylonian exile, centuries before, the Jewish people have their own sovereign state again. And Simon, he gets declared both high priest and ethnarch, which means ruler of the people. So he's combining religious and political authority in one person. And that was a major change from how things were traditionally done, where those roles were separate. It really was. And it's crucial to grasp that this wasn't just some, local uprising that got lucky. The Hasmoneans established a proper kingdom, with all the diplomatic trappings of an ancient state. They negotiated formal treaties. Judas Maccabeus had already started that with Rome. They had diplomatic relations with the Seleucids, their former oppressors, and they even forged alliances with powers further afield, like the Parthians. They were conducting international diplomacy, sending and receiving ambassadors, playing the great power politics game, basically on equal terms.
That's just an astonishing leap from hiding in the hills to being recognized sovereigns on the kind of world stage.
Yeah.
But whenever you have that kind of rapid, dramatic shift in power and, identity.
Yeah.
What sort of challenges pop up, internally, externally?
Yeah, that's a vital question. Because there was a major internal challenge. You see, the traditional high priesthood, going way back, had always belonged to the descendants of Zadok. That was the line established by King David. But the Hasmoneans, they were from a different priestly family altogether, and they'd gained their position through, well, military might, not hereditary right. This became a huge source of ongoing controversy, a real point of division within Jewish society, questioning their legitimacy in the eyes of many.
Ah, okay, I see. So legitimacy issues right from the start. And then under later rulers like John Hyrcanus and Alexander Jannaeus, the kingdom kept expanding.
Dramatically. They conquered territories that hadn't been part of a Jewish state since Solomon's time. Places like Samaria, Idumea, parts of Transjordan. They were tearing down pagan temples, yes, but they also started forcibly converting conquered peoples to Judaism.
Forcibly converting.
Yes, including, significantly, the Idumeans. And that's a really crucial detail because Herod the Great, who comes later, would emerge from that very group.
Wow, the ironies are starting to pile up already.
They really are. They certainly built a powerful state, no question. Minted their own coins, had professional armies, full international relations. Their names appeared on diplomatic letters alongside the big players like the Ptolemies and Seleucids. But here's the deep paradox, the irony you mentioned. In the very act of saving Jewish identity from external threats, they started to, well, subtly lose it from within. They began adopting Greek names. Alexander Jannaeus is a perfect example, building Greek-style palaces, embracing many of the Hellenistic customs their own ancestors had fought and died to resist.
In this period, this is also when we start to see those major religious parties emerge, the ones that are so prominent in Jesus' time, right? Can you tell us how that dynamic played out?
Absolutely. This is fertile ground for those groups. The Sadducees, for instance, they generally lined up with the Hasmonean rulers. They were more comfortable with Hellenistic culture and cooperation. The Pharisees, though, they were really different. They insisted on strict observance of the law, the Torah, and often found themselves opposing Hasmonean policies and this Hellenizing trend. And, those intense debates that flared up between them, like over the resurrection, that actually forced a deeper thinking about theology, about the afterlife. It directly set the stage for Jesus's own teachings on that subject. And then you had groups like the Essenes, possibly the community at Qumran, the ones who gave us the Dead Sea Scrolls. They basically looked at the whole situation, the temple, the priesthood, the politics, and said, this is corrupt. And they just withdrew from society altogether.
So all this success, this expansion, it ironically leads right into their fatal flaw. It seems things really came to a head under Queen Salome Alexandra.
Exactly. After her death in 67 BC, it all just imploded. Her two sons, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, they both wanted the throne, and they both wanted the high priesthood. And they plunged the entire nation into this devastating civil war.
It's almost like a pattern you see again and again in history, isn't it? The very things that bring people together, faith, identity, struggle, can, over time, twist and become the source of their undoing. So what was the sort of deeper spiritual cost of this Hasmonean transformation?
That's really the tragic irony of the whole Hasmonean story. The kingdom won through this incredible unity, this sacrifice, was now being torn apart by internal division, ambition, power struggles.
Right. And that sophisticated diplomacy they'd built, the treaties, the alliances, now it actually worked against them. Because unable to settle it themselves, what did the brothers do? They both appealed to Rome, to the rising power of Rome, asking them to arbitrate. They were basically inviting this huge foreign power to stick its nose right into their internal affairs.
Precisely. The very tools that had once protected their sovereignty, the treaty relationships, the diplomatic channels, now became the instruments of its destruction. So by 63 BC, you have the Roman general Pompey marching into Jerusalem. He even walks into the Holy of Holies in the temple, though, interestingly, Josephus says he didn't take anything. But that act alone, it effectively ended Jewish independence right there.
And connecting that to the bigger picture, what does that say about the spiritual state of things?
Well, it really revealed this deep spiritual crisis at the heart of Hasmonean rule. They had managed to preserve the forms of Jewish religion, the rituals, the temple, but often they had abandoned its substance, its heart. They fought so hard for religious freedom, the right to worship God according to his law, only to then use that very freedom to grab power and wealth. Their success, in a way, became the seed of their corruption. And it's such a powerful warning, isn't it? External enemies, persecution, often unite God's people, make them stronger even. But internal compromise, the love of power, that can rot things from the inside out and destroy what persecution could never touch.
So after Pompey, the final Hasmonean rulers were basically just puppet kings under Rome's thumb. It all ends with the last one, Antigonus, being executed by the Romans in 37 BC. And then the throne passes to Herod the Great, an Idumean, whose ancestors, as you said, were forcibly converted by the Hasmoneans themselves.
The historical irony is just inescapable. The dynasty that began fighting so fiercely for Jewish independence and religious purity is ultimately replaced by a foreign king whose very connection to Judaism traces back to a Hasmonean conquest.
And Herod's rule was just as full of contradictions, wasn't it? He rebuilt the temple magnificently, on an unbelievable scale. People came from all over to see it. But at the same time, he's building pagan cities, pagan temples elsewhere in his kingdom. He maintained Jewish religious practices, sure, but he also thoroughly integrated his whole realm into the Roman world. He really embodied that Hasmonean struggle, didn't he, between Jewish identity and Hellenistic or Roman essence.
Absolutely. So by the time Jesus is born in Bethlehem, the whole Jewish world is deeply marked, scarred even, by this Hasmonean experience. Those religious parties that emerged, Pharisees, Sadducees, others, they're locked in these bitter theological and political conflicts. And the people, the ordinary people, they're longing for a new Maccabee. They want a military Messiah, someone who will come and throw out the Romans, just like Judah threw out the Greeks. Their expectations of a Messiah are directly shaped by those memories of Maccabean victories. The Hasmonean period proved, you see, that military victory was possible. They'd seen it. But it had also powerfully, tragically demonstrated that political independence without real spiritual renewal, well, it was ultimately empty, futile.
Okay, so looking back at this whole complex, messy, dramatic story, what does it all mean for us? How did God use even the failures, the compromises, the tragedies of the Hasmoneans to prepare for Christ's coming?
It's fascinating, really. What stands out is God's incredible providence, working through it all. Even the struggles of the Hasmonean era ended up contributing to his larger purposes. Think about the Septuagint, the translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. That happened partly because of the Hellenistic context the Hasmoneans navigated. And it made God's word accessible across the whole Roman world, huge for the spread of the gospel later. Or the synagogues. That network of local worship and study centers really developed and spread during and after this period, partly because the temple was sometimes inaccessible or seen as compromised, and those synagogues became ready-made platforms for Christian preaching just a few decades later.
Right. Paul went straight to the synagogues in every city.
Exactly. And those fierce religious debates between the Pharisees and Sadducees, they actually clarified key theological issues, resurrection, angels, the law, which were crucial for people to understand the gospel message when it arrived. Even Roman rule itself, which crushed Jewish independence, ironically provided the stability, the roads, the common language that allowed Christianity to spread so rapidly, and the deep disappointment with earthly kingdoms, with political saviors, that prepared hearts to long for a different kind of kingdom, a heavenly one. Even the corruption of the priesthood, sadly, just highlighted the desperate need for a perfect high priest, which Hebrews tells us Jesus is.
That really does put God's sovereignty in sharp focus, using even the broken pieces. But there's also that sobering lesson you mentioned earlier about the danger of compromise, of movements losing their way.
Oh, absolutely. The Hasmonean story is such a stark warning about that. The dynasty starts with these heroes, willing to literally die for their faith, Mattathias, Judah, but it ends with their descendants. Rulers who were basically selling the high priesthood office to the highest bidder. They kept the outward forms of religion going, the sacrifices, the temple rituals, but they completely lost its heart, its meaning. They gained political independence, but they became spiritually enslaved to power, to wealth, to Hellenistic ways. And that pattern, it's a warning for every generation of believers, I think. External persecution, often it strengthens the church, purifies it, but internal compromise, that slow, gradual accommodation to worldly values, worldly methods, that can destroy what open hostility never could. The Hasmoneans are this powerful reminder that it's entirely possible to win battles but still lose the war, to preserve the institutions, the buildings, the structures, while abandoning the very principles they were meant to uphold.
So if we bring it all together, this Hasmonean period, it really was this crucial bridge, connecting the Old Testament prophets and the New Testament church. During these not-so-silent years, Jewish religious identity was preserved against all odds. The major religious parties of Jesus' time took shape. Messianic hopes were focused, maybe even distorted, but definitely focused. The Hebrew scriptures got translated into Greek, the Septuagint. The synagogue system spread across the Mediterranean world. And maybe most importantly, the limits of purely political or military solutions to deep spiritual problems became painfully, undeniably clear. All of this just perfectly set the stage for a totally different kind of kingdom and a totally different kind of king.
That's exactly right. You could say the Hasmoneans, in a sense, saved Judaism from being wiped out by Hellenism. But they also revealed its profound need for something more, for transformation. They preserved the covenant community, yes, but they also exposed its desperate need for a new covenant, a new heart.
And this next point, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The Hasmonean period gave Israel these great warriors, these Maccabees, who won temporary victories, established an earthly kingdom that ultimately failed,
Yeah.
crumbled. But during this very same time, God was preparing for the arrival of a greater warrior, one who would win an eternal victory and establish an everlasting kingdom. Jesus Christ didn't come as another Judah Maccabee leading an army of zealots to fight Romans.
No.
He came as the Prince of Peace, leading an army of servants. He came not to drive out Romans with swords, but to drive out sin with love. Not just to cleanse the physical temple with force, but to cleanse human hearts with his grace.
Yes, the Hasmoneans showed the absolute peak of what human courage, human dedication, human religious zeal could achieve. They could win battles, they could restore ceremonies, they could rebuild walls, but they couldn't change hearts. They couldn't truly restore the broken relationship between God and his people. They could preserve the outward forms of religion, but they couldn't provide the inner spiritual power needed to actually live up to God's demands.
And Christ came to do precisely what the Hasmoneans, for all their bravery, could not.
Exactly. To be the perfect high priest, the truly righteous king, the faithful Israelite who fulfilled everything, where they succeeded only partially and only temporarily. He succeeded completely and eternally. Where they ultimately failed because of human weakness, ambition, and sin. He triumphed through divine strength and perfect, loving obedience.
So you see, those silent years between the Testaments, they weren't silent at all.
Not in the slightest. They were preparation years. God was actively, powerfully preparing his people, preparing the whole world for the arrival of his son. And maybe the takeaway for us listening today is to learn from the Hasmoneans' incredible courage, but without repeating their fatal compromises. To trust God's providence, his unfolding plan, even when, maybe especially when we can't fully see or understand it. And ultimately, to rest our hope, not in any earthly kingdom, no matter how well-intentioned or seemingly godly its origins, but firmly in the eternal kingdom of Jesus Christ.